in terms of what it can actually do for them.
Mr. Clark, can you talk a little bit more about what your members, businesses are asking for from you? What do they need?
Yeah, more often than not, we're hearing that they need entry-level employees having some type of experience to start, being job ready. Truly with some of those job ready skills you'd expect. A lot of us learn them in our first job, right? You learn how to be on time, you learned how to use good judgment, you learn to listen to a supervisor and to work as a team. All of those types of things are the things I hear the most that they feel like is missing as people are coming out of school and going into work. And so now with AI, I think that they're expecting even more of an entry-level role than they used to. And so this idea of work-based learning and learning early in high school and in college enough is critical for people to be successful now.
Got it. Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Hickenlooper, and what a great panel. So just a couple of things. So Dr. Palakashvili, I'm really glad that you mentioned the disequity in the tax code where we reward companies for investments in capital, but not in human capital training. Senator Warner has long had a bill to try to equalize the depreciation schedules for those kinds of investments so that we don't advantage capital investments over human capital training investments. And I'm glad that you mentioned that. One of the things that I have been really grappling with as I've been listening to you is kind of Mr. Clark's statement at the beginning of the worry of knocking out the first jobs on the ladder so that people can't learn what they need to climb the ladder. And it does match up a little bit with some recent employment data suggesting that the unemployment rate among young adults is ticking up while others are ticking down, both the 18 to 24-year-olds, but also the 24 to 30-year-olds who are finishing college. And the New York Fed just did a study that was interesting. They did not yet find that AI was a big generator of that, although this issue of knocking out the first rung on the ladder would make us want to watch that trend. But what they found actually was remote work was a significant reason for it, because companies that want to go into remote work would prefer to hire folks that they don't need to mentor because they've already gained the skills through mentoring. So if you're going to do a remote work thing, well, I need to really mentor that first-time worker, but others who've done it already, I don't need to mentor. And it turns out that that has hurt young workers. So I'm very worried about this youth effect. Nothing would be worse, you know, to have a society where young people, especially starting off their careers, are unemployed or underemployed. And so we have to kind of think that through. And so I hope we'll grapple with that as a committee. I was thinking, what is an area of work where the young people will never be pushed aside by AI? And I thought the military. We're never just going to say we only need sergeants. We don't need privates anymore, right? We will continue to bring in newcomers. And so I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and it might be a really interesting thing for academics, think tanks, employers to study, because the military is extremely intentional about personnel and training. You know, everybody gets an MOS, their military occupation specialty, and everybody gets trained in that MOS. And I know the different branches of the military are trying to incorporate AI into that training. And so a system-wide study of the way the military is using AI for that very entry level, that 18-year-old, to advance in their skill set. And, you know, probably works really well in some MOSs and maybe others not quite so well, but it would be a fertile field of study for like 1 million plus people to see the way AI is being used to augment military training. And it's also, I think, going to end up being a real advantage that folks who've been in the military may have when they get ready to transition into the civilian workforce. I have been in a workforce where what I have been doing has involved pretty significant interaction with AI tools at every step along the way. I think that'll be a positive for military members as they transition. But I don't know, I've got 1.5 minutes left. Does anybody want to just offer a thought about how we should try to focus on the needs of young people so that this squeeze of whether it's remote work or the first rung of the ladder disappearing, we're not losing a generator, depressing the hopes of young people that they're going to have meaningful careers? Ms. Rogers, you were wanting to jump right in.
Thank you, Senator Kaine. I think one of the things that we need to consider is one of the things happening is in terms of demographic trends, we are having fewer proportionally young people moving up. In some ways, AI could wind up helping us mitigate the slowing population gains that we have in the younger population, while we have a larger gain in the elderly population. So I think part of what we can do is think about AI not as a thing, but a set of opportunities with knowledge that we can apply to challenges. We don't talk about the arts and creative employment, and yet what we have seen through Bureau of Economic Analysis data over the past few years is a significant, small but significant growth, continuing growth in Indiana among those creative worker positions. And one of the things that we ought to do is start thinking more creatively or more globally about what is in demand in our neighborhood, in our regions, in our state, around not high knowledge occupations or skilled trades, but what about some of these in the middle that we're not really paying?
And I'm over time, but I would just say, as the kind of surprised father of two working artists who are quite confident that their work will never be replaced by AI, I'm really glad to hear you say that.
Thank you. Senator
If I
Blunt.
could say, they
Rochester.
will use AI, though, but not be replaced.
Senator Blunt, Rochester.
Thank you, Chairman Banks, as well as Ranking Member Hickenlooper, for allowing me to wave onto this committee. The conversation is important and riveting and timely. I must say it is, I'm a person who is generally a very hopeful person. And the conversations around AI a lot today are very fear-based. A lot of people have a lot of concerns about losing their jobs. Artists have concerns about, there's a soul artist out there making more money than people who actually have souls. So it's a challenging time when we talk about AI. And also, as a former Secretary of Labor from Delaware, I was around when the workforce investment boards were first established under WIA, before WIOA. And so I have so many questions for you in so little time. One question that I have for Mr. Clark, which I'll come back to, is workforce investment boards. Are there changes that we need to make in light of these changes in technology? So that's a question for you. You can write it down. You can answer it later. Dr. Palagashvili, I have a question for you. We've all been talking about the gaps in the data. And I'm just curious, are there places that you, right now, sources of data that you use to help predict and plan now, or sources that we don't want to stop collecting, that we need to continue to collect? And that's probably for the entire panel. So I'll start with that question. What are we getting right and don't want to stop in terms of getting data?